At the beginning, not only for me, but also for all my generation, I would say, it was a moment that we finally had a chance to imagine, to have the opportunity even to imagine if Tunisia succeeds, maybe Yemen can succeed. If Egypt will succeed, Yemen will succeed.
Ali Abdullah Saleh had been in power in Yemen for more than 30 years. But like the people of Egypt and Tunisia, Yemenis had grown frustrated with the man in charge. And despite all of their divisions, tribal, regional, and to a lesser extent sectarian, when protesters started to hit the streets in 2011, it became clear that Saleh was in trouble. These demonstrators were determined. They were united by anger. They had no jobs, they were poor, and all they could see was corruption.
Of course, each country is different from each other, but finally, that imagination that we didn't even have that privilege to imagine a different Yemen from the miserable Yemen that we were living in, that was the time for us to just unleash our imagination.
Saleh served as president of what was North Yemen for more than 10 years. But then, in 1990, he oversaw the reunification with the south into what became known as the Republic of Yemen. It wasn't long before Yemenis got to know their leader's way with heavy-handed tactics, which he used to crush secessionists in the south. Saleh built a reputation as a political strategist. He created a vast patronage system that rewarded his supporters, notably the leaders of prominent tribes, including his own, who he placed in top positions. This helped them to get rich, but most people in Yemen, already the region's poorest country, saw their living standards drop even further. In 2011, it all fell to pieces. The Arab Spring had arrived in Yemen.
If we take the first phase, basically before the violence started, for me that was the pure youth-led and women-led protest that really did not care about any division, did not care about the deeply rooted political and security problems in Yemen, that did not really care about how it might be scary what is in the future for Yemen. All their goal was to really demand together a civil state where equal citizenship for everyone is guaranteed by the state.
The protests showed no signs of letting up, so the Gulf Cooperation Council got concerned and convinced Ali Abdullah Saleh to step down. But that was only after he and his family were granted immunity. Then, in early 2013, the GCC joined with the UN to set up a national dialogue conference to transition Yemen to a democracy. But many Yemenis say the process was flawed from the very beginning.
I think the turning point in the uprising was the fact that Ali Abdullah Saleh was given impunity by the international community, by the United Nations, by the GCC. So that transition did not really have transitional justice.
Other issues also threatened to derail Yemen's transition. Houthi rebels in the north and southern representatives looking for a more equitable distribution of the country's wealth were not convinced by the conference's terms. The Houthis would soon act on their dissatisfaction by launching a military offensive. They ended up taking the capital Sana'a from the transitional administration that was led by President Abdurrabbu Mansour Hadi.
For me, and I think for a lot of people in Yemen, they do understand there is a crisis of lack of accountability. Even for Houthis, they have their own grievances that would never been heard or listened to by the state.
This is where the Saudis come in. For a long time, Saudi Arabia had considered the Houthis allies of Iran, its regional nemesis. And in 2015, a military coalition led by the Saudis launched a campaign to restore the government of President Hadi, who had escaped to the Saudi capital Riyadh. Then, Saleh got back in the game. He re-emerged from his forced retirement to join forces with the Houthis, his old enemies. Saleh was trying to get his old job back. But in late 2017, he abruptly quit the alliance. The Houthis saw Saleh's decision as a betrayal and assassinated him. The war in Yemen barely noticed. There's been almost no let-up. The UN has described it as the world's worst humanitarian disaster. 24 million people, 80% of the population, require humanitarian assistance. In December, members of a newly formed unity government arrived at an airport in Aden and were welcomed by explosions. It was just another example of the challenges Yemen faces.
It's really difficult to predict things in Yemen. That's at least what I know from the Arab Spring. Every time I try to be optimistic, we just face another setback and failure. But I would say that the future in Yemen will really be decided by Yemenis themselves. I wish the world really understands that it was fascinating and magnificent what happened in Yemen, especially the pure part of the uprising in the beginning, where thousands and thousands, if not millions, of young people dreaming of a better Yemen. And I think we have to really recognize that uniqueness, where everyone was talking about terrorism in Yemen, and for lots of young people, and especially women, to lead those protests and favor it over weapons and tribalism and violent means. It was magnificent, and I wish the world really recognized this and understand the uniqueness of it.